So I wanted to make a video about programming in general, like a quick introduction about programming, like programming for dummy. But since there is always a book called Programming for Dummy, I decided to call it Scripting for Dummies. This is basically gonna provide a basic introduction about programming in general. So when then people talk about programming or scripting, you know what they are referring to, what they are talking about. So in this guide, we're gonna pass to a quick introduction. We're gonna talk about variable, math operator, if logic, and creating function, and we're gonna finish talking about arrays. So getting started, like this guide is really for a newbie that doesn't understand or know about programming. And when we talk about programming or scripting, what we're referring to, so all programs like that run on your computer are contained in the same text file that contain no formatting. So programs such as Word are not to be used. For writing program, it is really recommended to use tools like Notepad++ on Windows, like here, gedit on Linux, or TextMate on Mac. These are really powerful text editors that you can do a lot of programming or scripting. So when you talk about programming or scripting, you gotta use a programming language. And a programming language is basically a tool used to tell the computer what to do. So basically, you just give the computer a task that he needs to execute. So one thing, like there is dozens of programming language. So one thing is to understand here is like we're not going to talk about in one programming language in general, but we're going to talk about programming as a whole in general, what you can find in other programming language. So now let's talk about things that you will find in programming language or scripting language. So variable. So basically most of the time when you do programming or scripting, you need to hold some information. For example, the name of your user, the age of your user, the gender of the user. So all of this you need to use variable. So variable basically they are data storage location we are assigning with the name. So basically a variable is a name that holds a value, information. That's it. That's basically what a variable is, a name that holds a value that means something to you as a programmer. So usually in a programming language, that is how you describe a variable, like you talk a name and a value, a data that variable gonna hold. So for example, if you wanna hold the user age, you're gonna name the variable like here age and give it a value, like for example 24. Also you can see this example. Also you wanna hold the number pi, you're gonna declare a variable named pi and give it the value 3.5. And if you wanna hold the name, same thing, you declare your variable name and you give it a value. As you can see, these are considered variable. So as you can see, the variable name is on the left side and the value is held on the right side. And as you can see, there are different type of variable value. As you can see, we have a number here, a real number, a string here. This is a character, and this is basically a boolean value. A boolean means that this thing can only hold false or true, just 0 or 1, just two values. But as you can see, there's integer value like here, real value, string value. Basically there are word like here, and character that basically are letter. So basically these are the type of variable that you can find in a program. Integer, like that represent whole number. You have float that represent decimal number. We have string that like here that represent text, and we have character that represent a letter like here, and boolean value that represent true or false. And like I said, obviously you can see here Python, which is a programming language, a scripting language, so people might say F should be uppercase, but just keep in mind I'm just talking about programming in general. This here was just used as an example to show what you can, how to declare a variable in basically common programming or scripting language, so keep that in mind. So since we learned about variable, let's talk about math and operator. So when you do some scripting, sometimes you want to do some calculation. That is basically what we refer here as math. Just do some computation. So basically in any scripting or programming language, you can do computation, solve some equation, basically anything that revolves around calculate. So let's say I want to know the result by multiplying 800 by 600. So since I want to know the value, I will use a variable to hold the value. But this right here is what we call a expression, like a mathematical expression. Basically, a expression is a value unit or code that resolves to a value, meaning any combination of operators such as variable, constant that produce a value. Basically, any operation that can be computed here is recognized as an expression. So here our expression is the multiplication of 800 by 600, and the result of this will be held in the variable here that we're going to declare with a name. So after that we can just combine multiple variables to get a new variable. Like here we can use the add operator to combine a variable 1 plus a variable 2 to get the result and put it in a var answer here in another variable. So basically this variable here will hold the result of variable 1 plus variable 2. And keep in mind that here var1 will be replaced by his actual value, and var2 will be replaced also as his actual value. So keep that in mind. So in programming language there are ton of operators that you can use to do some computation. To do addition you can use the add symbol here, subtraction you can use the minus symbol here, multiplication, division, modulus. This is the operator used to get the rest of a division here, and the exponent operator. So there are also other not common operator, but that some programming language have and other doesn't, like this, the plus plus operator that increment your variable by 1, the minus minus operator that decrement your variable by 1. And also we have this that basically do the same thing as the incremental and the decremental operator. So let's see a couple of examples. So if we had a variable here and we want to add plus 1 to a variable like his value plus 1, we can use this our variable name and the operator plus plus. And if you want to decrement that value, we can use the minus minus, the decremental operator, and here we can do the same thing with the incrementation here. But notice that using this and this are two different things. For this incrementation operator we need another value here, and for this incremental value we don't need another value. He just add 1, but here we can just take our variable value and add it here with another value, for example 5 or 6. So now let's talk about if and logic statement. Basically this is one of the important topics about scripting and programming. Get your program to do something based off a condition or when something happens. So that is basically what the if statement is. If statement is used to compare data, and after that to decide what to do based on the result of the comparison. So basically if statement, think of it as a condition. Like for example, in the game reacts based on the thing or the button you push. If you push forward, the character gonna go forward. If you push backward, the character gonna go backward. So if statement is a conditional branch, meaning that based on the condition being tested, the program gonna react differently. So to use if statement, you need to know about logic operator that you use to do logic comparison. For example, if you want to test if two numbers are equal, you're going to use this operator. And basically, if two numbers are not equal, you're going to use this operator. This is the negation operator to do the not, the less than, the greater than, the less or equal to, greater or equal to, the and the or operator. Okay, so now we have some operator. Let's get started with if statement. So a if statement requires minimum one argument and usually one operator. So let's see a couple of examples. So this is a if statement. If in parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're gonna test a expression that can be true or false. So right here, that means if my variable, for example, is a boolean, like you talk about, boolean can be false or true. So right here is just testing if my variable boolean is true. We're gonna do this. So that's basically what it does here, if variable is true. And right here, as you can see, we use one argument, a variable, and one operator here. The negation operator, that means not. So that basically means if my variable is not true. See, as you can see, if my variable is not true, we're gonna do this. So here we use the equal to operator. If my variable 1 is equal to my variable 2, and what we mean by equal here mean they are the same, they hold the same value. So here we're using the not equal operator here, the not equal operator here, like if my variable 1 is not equal to my variable 2, as you can see, and so on, so on. Here we're using the less than operator. If my integer 1 value is less than my integer 2 value, here we test if it is greater than. Here same thing, we test if my integer variable 1 is less than or equal to my integer value 2. Here we test if it is greater or equal. And here basically this can be broken into two parts. We have this part here, we have this here, and we have this here. So basically, let's go here. Like we saw earlier, this equal to operator tests if two variables are equal. So basically, if var1 is equal to var2, and this is the AND operator, right here, the AND operator, and my var3 is not equal to my var4, so this expression can only be true if var1 is equal to var2 and var3 is different of variable 4. So basically that is what that means. If var1 is equal to var2 and var2 is not equal to var4. And last one, here we're using the OR operator. So basically here the AND operator, these two conditions need to be true to execute the code inside the if. And right here using the OR operator, meaning if my integer 1 value is greater than my integer 2 value, or my variable 1 value is equal to my variable 2 value, we're gonna do this. So basically in the OR operator only one condition need to be true. For example, integer 1 is greater than integer 2, the statement can be true, or var1 is equal to var2, the statement also can be true. If one of these is true, here we're gonna execute the code inside the if. So let's see what that means by the code inside the if. So basically this is a complete if statement, if and a condition, and then some bracket and the code that we need to execute inside the if statement. So basically if the statement above is true, the code inside the curly bracket is processed, and if it is not true, meaning the condition, the code inside the bracket are skipped. So basically this is a complete if statement here. So whatever or not the statement is true, the code outside the bracket, meaning here, is going to be executed. So, and basically if you don't want this code to be executed, whatever the if is true or not, you can use the else statement here after the if statement. So basically this is the if else statement. So meaning the else statement here will be executed only if this condition is false. So basically if this, for example, if var1 is equal to var2, the instruction inside this bracket, all the instruction inside this bracket will be executed. But if this condition is false, only this code inside the else here bracket will be executed. So basically this is the if statement. If the if is true, the code inside the if will be executed. But if the if condition is false, the code inside the else will be executed. So, and we can have basically multiple if statement. So that is the same. If this condition is true, you're gonna execute the code right here inside the if. But if it is not true, we're gonna check this other condition. This also is a if statement. And if also the code is not true, then finally we're gonna execute the code that is inside here. So basically if this condition is true, we're only gonna execute the code inside this bracket here, and none of these other conditions or code will be touched. But only if the first if statement is false, we're going to test the second if statement to see if it is true. If it is true, the code inside the bracket will be executed. So if not, this is the last case, so the code inside the else will be executed. So basically this is what is if statement here. So now we understand if statement. Let's talk about loop statement. So loop can come in different form. So first of all, we have a while loop. A while loop is a loop that keep looping while the argument is true. So let's see an example here. So right here we have a variable that called num that hold the value 0, and we have basically this is a while statement. Basically it's just like a if statement, but rather than using the keyword if, we use the keyword while. So while and a condition here, while num is less than 10, so while 0 is less than 10, that is true. So the code inside the bracket are going to be executed. So while 0 is less than 10, wait 1 second, then use the incremental operator to increment the variable num by 1. So right here num will be equal to 1, and after that, rather than executing just once the if statement, the while statement go back to check the condition again. So now num is equal to 1, so we will test is 1 is less than 10. That is true. Again, the code inside the bracket here will be executed. We're gonna wait 1 second, and then we're gonna increment the value of num again. So now num will be equal to 2, sorry. Then go back to the same condition again. So it's 2 less than 10. So we're gonna do the same, execute the code inside the bracket, wait for 1 second, and increment the value of num. Now it will be equal to 3, so on, so on. We're gonna test 3 is 3 less than 10. Again, it's 4 less than 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And when num is equal to 10, we will go here. It's 10 less than 10, that is false, that is not true. So the code right here will be not executed. We're gonna exit the while loop. So right here, the above code will loop while num is less than 10. The loop will wait for 1 second, and then the loop will increment the value of num. So once num is now less than 10, meaning basically equal to 10, the loop will break. So we're gonna get out of the loop here only if the value of num is less than 10. So that is basically a while loop. But here keep in mind if we didn't increment the value of num here, so let's say we remove this, So basically when we come here, while num here is less than 10, meaning 0 is less than 10, that is true, the code inside the bracket will be executed. But since you removed the incremental operator, so the value of num will never change, so we'll come back to that same condition, test the same condition, while 0 is less than 10. So basically this right here will have loop forever, like until somebody stops the program. But if we didn't add the incremental operator here, if we didn't have this, the code right here would have looped forever. That is what we call an infinite loop. So when you use a while loop, make sure that you have a way to break this condition here. If you don't, this loop gonna loop forever, like an infinity loop. So keep that in mind. So also we have a for loop. For loop is to loop a set of amount of time. So basically this is the syntax for a for loop. Right here we have to initialize first a variable, then give a condition, then we need to increment that variable. So basically a common for loop look like this. Right here we have the initialization here, then we have the condition here, and then we have the increment here. So basically the above code is right here. So I is equal to 0, while I is less than size, the variable size, add 1 to I. Basically that is a for loop. So let's see an example. So I2 is equal to 0, while I is less than 10. Do this, wait for 1 second, and after all the code inside the bracket is executed, we're gonna come back here and increment the variable I by 1. So basically a for loop will go like this. First, this is the first attack, the initialization here, I is equal to 0. Then we're gonna test this condition, is I is less than 10. Then if it is true, we're gonna execute the code inside the bracket. Then after that, after executing the code inside the bracket, then we're going to increment the value of I. So basically for a loop is 1, 2, 3, then after the incremental part. Always keep in mind that the incremental part come at the end. So at the end, and this one is just executed 1. So basically after the initialization, then we're gonna test the condition. Then if the condition is true, we're gonna execute the code inside the bracket. After we're gonna increment our variable. Then after the incrementation, we're gonna come back to the condition here. So this is only executed at the beginning. After that, it's not going to be executed again. So basically this is a for loop. So infinity loop is a loop that loop forever. So we talk about it. So basically in a while loop, if the condition right here that we testing is 1 or a boolean, this is considered as a infinity loop here, because this condition gonna always be true, so we're going to loop forever. And we can do the same for a for loop by using this syntax right here. So this also gonna loop forever. So the above will be keep repeating the code until it is manually started. We talk about infinite loop here. So to exit a infinity loop, we can use a if statement to determine when to break. So how to exit the loop? So when we use a infinity loop, so basically this is a infinity loop by for, like we saw here. So basically we're gonna come here and we're gonna exit the infinity loop if this condition is true. Basically if this condition is true, we're gonna use the break statement to exit a infinity loop. We couldn't do the same for a while loop, so we can use a break to exit a infinity loop. So this is the breakdown of this syntax. We're gonna wait for 1 second, then we're gonna check if var1 is equal to var2. If it is true, we're gonna exit the loop here by this break statement. If not, we're gonna continue the loop again. So basically these are what we call loops. We have a for and a while loops. What are functions? A custom function is a good way to use and repair section of your code more efficiently. So for example, if you use the same sequence of code, you can put it in a custom function to use it more efficiently. So for example, let's say we have this piece of code right here. that calculate the area of a circle. So basically, if you wanted to calculate the area of another circle with a different radius, you will need to change the value here of this radius. So, and later on, if you want to use that same piece of code, you will need to declare other variable also to be able to use it. So to avoid that, we can use a function. So basically, a function just regroup a piece of code that will be executed. So for example, let's say we want to create a custom function that calculates the area of a circle given a radius. So basically, this is a keyword function, then you give your function a name and then some parameter. It can be 0 or multiple parameter. But since we want to calculate the area of the circle, we only will need one parameter, meaning the radius. We can assume that pi is a constant here and the value is here. So basically, this is a function, a custom function that calculates the area of a circle for any given radius here. So once we have a function here, we can use it by calling the function by giving it a argument here. This is how we call a function, the name of the function, parentheses, then we give it the needed argument here. So basically here we calculate here the area of a circle for a radius of 1, and here for the radius is 2. As you can see, function is very helpful. Like if you going to repeat a piece of code many times, you can just put it in a function. So you just need to call the function rather than repeating the same piece of code. So this is an array of strings. As you can see, we can also have an array of integer. This can be the some value, meaning can be any value that is important to you. For example, some temperature, you want to know the average also sample of a study that you are doing. So basically, a array is a collection of the same data type that you can use, and here we have a array of real numbers. So that is basically what our array, just a collection of elements of the same type. So couple of things to keep in mind with array is their size, meaning how many elements are in our array. So basically, if an array contains one piece of data, the size of your array is 1. So size meaning the number of elements, how many elements that my array have. So for example, if you take the array average here, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 elements. So the size of this array will be 4. Same thing here. How many elements that my array sample have? It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 elements here. So keep in mind about when you mention size, you are talking about how many. So another thing to really pay attention about array is that array are using by using a indices. So for example, let's say we want to take the value of the first element of our array. So we'll do this. We'll use the name of our array, parentheses, and the index of the first element. So the first element of our array starts with the index 0. So at index 0 we have 10.5. This will be our first element. The second element, 11.5, will be at index 1. So on and so on. So it's really important to keep in mind that to access individual element in an array, element in an array really start at index 0, meaning the first element is at index 0. So if you had a array that contains 10 pieces of data, the size will be 10, but you will only able to access element from 0 to 9. because the first element of our array is not at index 0. So basically with array you have two things to keep in mind: the size, meaning how many elements my array have, and also the indexes that start with 0. So basically those two are the most important thing to consider when using arrays. So last thing that I wanted to talk about is switch statement. So often we can use if and else statement, but sometimes there are many cases to cover, so using bunch of if and else statement can be not pleasing to do. So there is something called a switch statement. A switch is often used where there are multiple limited outcomes for a single variable. So a switch statement here function can often be replaced by left if and else statement, but switch statement is more efficient for variable being checked has a limited amount of outcomes. So if you know the possible outcome, it's better to use a switch statement here. So basically this is the syntax of a switch statement. So let's take, we want to take an input from a user, and depending of the user answer, we're going to determine which type of animal it is. So basically we have the keyword switch here. In parentheses we are going to put a variable that will take the different possible outcome. Then we're going to take case of every single outcome that we want to take care of. So the case that the user typed up, the result will be this. So in case it is a cat, the result will be this. In case if it is a tiger, the result will be this. The value of the result will be this. And if it is none of a dog, cat, or a tiger, the default value will be this. This is the default value. If none of these three cases is covered, the default value will be this. And as you can see, there is this break statement here that you need to add for every single case. If you forget to add it, the switch statement will not going to behave correctly. So keep that in mind. Right? When you use switch for every single case, you're going to use a break statement here. So basically this is a switch statement that you can use. So we can compare switch argument animal with several cases of value. If none of these cases is equal to the argument, the block under the default label is executed. Simply put, a break statement is used to exit a switch statement. Like I mentioned here, we need a break statement for every single switch. Although most of the switch statements in real life imply that one of them cases a block should be executed, the break statement is necessary to exit a switch after the block is completed. So it's really important to not forget to use a break after every single case for your switch. So honestly, that's it. That is all I wanted to talk about. This was just a quick overview about programming in general. What can you expect when you're doing some scripting or programming? And obviously it depends of the programming language that you are using, but these are notions that you're gonna find for every single programming language in general. So basically this is the knowledge that you need to know working with programming, and case can vary depending on your programming language, but in general this is the steps that you're gonna find in the programming language of scripting. So please leave a comment, like, and subscribe. That will help me a lot. So thank you.